Alright, this is a video for user 911 on Facebook that has an issue saying Newton's third law must be ridiculous because it states that a book, when it is using its weight to press down on a table, that the table has to be pressing back up on the book. And I believe one of the biggest things you're hung up on is it has to do with gravity, which, if you're a flat earther, you have a problem with gravity. But when I, as someone who believes in round earth, talk to you flat earth someone about anything involving flat earth, I talk about it assuming the earth is flat, because otherwise there's no discussion at all. If you want to claim whatever works on flat earth, we talk about as if assuming earth is flat. So when we're talking about the principles of Newton's third law, it has, especially when having to do with gravity, the reason it works is because we are talking about the model of the Earth with gravity. So if you can't talk about the thing that exists in the model that we're talking about as if we're in the model, then there's no discussion. You're just crying, pretty much. Like, there's no point in you even talking. So this is why it works, because we're talking about gravity. This is involving a weight and a thing stopping the weight. So gravity, two objects in space. They are like magnets. They don't have poles, but if they are magnets facing each other so that they would attract, they are just attracted to each other. And when two magnets come together in midair, do you call one of them the attractor and one of them is like the attracted? Can you justify how you decide which magnet is the poled and which is the polar? So if you think it has to do the weight, no. The big magnet, since it has more mass, would tend to not move as much, but it's the same force. The same force on a big-ass object makes it move slower. So if you threw a giant magnet in the air, the tiny magnet, the tiny one would appear to be the one that moves, but the big one would also move. Just scale up the sizes. Like if you had a bunch of magnets, imagine same size, you throw them in the air. One slightly bigger, you throw it in the air. You keep getting one slightly bigger until you have like twice as big. It's going to move like half as much. And then you get to a point where it's almost unnoticeable that the big one is moving, but it is. They're pulling towards each other. You can't call one the poled and one the polar. So, on a book, on an earth, the earth is a gigantic mass, and there's the book. They are two separate masses until you put the table under them and set it down that want to go near each other. They are essentially two magnets, gigantic magnet, little magnet. Just the fact they have magnetism, they want to go near each other. The fact that they have gravity, that gravity is a thing, draws the masses together. So they are just two things mutually going towards each other. Whoever lifted the book up, put a table under it. Now it's just in the middle of the pressing. The two things pressing against each other. It is just how it is. It's hard to think about that because the earth is so gigantic that it seems like it doesn't move, which it pretty much is not. It's barely moving. But the only reason the book is drawn to the earth is because the earth is drawn to the book. Same as two magnets. So that's why you can't get away from that. You can't just assume we're not talking about the model, because then you're just not even talking about, you're not even talking about it. It's like we're trying to talk about math with just numbers, and you're assuming that numbers, one number could be dozens and one number could be single things. You can't just, the rules of the Newton's law we're talking about are in the earth as we know it, as having gravity, being round in space. So I don't know if any of this you'd have a problem with, but the book, that's the assumed, it's pressing up while it's pressing down because there's gravity. You put a scale in the middle, and you think the scale is only measuring the force of the book. It doesn't matter if you turn the scale upside down. If you have a pusher and a pushed, does that mean a scale also have a measuring side and a not measuring side? So why does that work? And a good illustration of force, because I think you're hung up on force has to do something, which it does not. A spring is a perfect example of having a force without doing anything. You put a spring under anything with gravity, and it experiences force. It gets pressed. Can you press a spring in between your fingers and say which finger you're pressing with? That one does not get pressed on by the spring. You could sit here and say, I am only moving my thumb, but the fact that you press the spring with either finger, it presses on both of them. It'll leave a mark. This bottle, I'm pressing down, and yeah, in our world, I am the pusher. I am pushing down If I do a handstand, my whole weight due to gravity is pushing down. And the only reason that's happening is because me and the earth and whatever's attached to the earth, my house, are both pulled to each other. So I would be doing a handstand, I'd be pressed towards it, it would be pressed into me, and that's the reason there's a mark in my hand. If I can be the pusher and it doesn't push back, why is there a mark in my hand? How did that happen? If nothing's pressing against me, how's there a mark in my hand? Just explain how that's possible. If I'm pressing and there's no force whatsoever in my hand, why is there a mark in my hand of that cap, that exact relief on that cap? So, spring, good example of pressing without doing anything. You don't have to do anything to have pressure or a force. You squeeze a spring in a vise. Once you're done, you leave it sitting there. It's not doing anything. Having a force that's just in the middle of two things that doesn't actually do anything is not a problem. If you think it's a problem, squeeze a spring in your hand, squeeze a spring into something that is smaller than it was, and leave it just sit there. Imagine, can you do work with a spring that's pressed? Can it just be pressed just because it has force on both sides of it? Can it do work without moving? No. Pressure, a force stuck in the middle of two objects does not mean it has to do something. So it shouldn't be an issue that the table's pressing up on the book and the book's pressing down the table. It feels weird, I guess, but there's nothing wrong with that. If you put a spring in the middle, the book, you really think the book is not feeling the spring pressing on it. Only the scale, for some reason, is feeling spring press on it. If you turn the scale upside down, what's feeling the spring? The scale and the table? I don't know what you think. Maybe you thought some of these things would be weird. I don't know. So, and then it comes to a guy holding up a book. When you hold up the book, since you don't think that there's a force pressing up, does that mean it takes me nothing to hold up a book? When I hold up this book, just because I am effectively now the table, does that mean that I am applying nothing because I'm making it stand still? The book is weighing down and you can feel it on your fingertips. If it had a texture on it, it would press into my fingertips and I would be pressing back up. So if I'm the pusher and the book is the pusher, how is this any different than a table? If I sit still, how is this any different than a table? What do you think is going on? I'm like a spring, and then a spring compressed and sitting there is just like a surface. So how is a surface any different than anything? I don't see what your problem is. But let me know if you still got a problem, because I don't know what else to tell you.